Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Aditya here. Today we are diving into a powerful feature of AWS API Gateway that can really help with safer and smoother deployments. That is, Canary deployments. Okay, the first question arises was, what is this Canary deployment? So essentially, it's a method of gradually releasing a new version of your software to a small controlled percentage of users before rolling it out to everyone. Okay, so this approach minimizes the risk and gives you a chance to catch up early issues. Definitely, right? And usually these canary deployments are advisable in production environments. So what is canary deployment? Instead of releasing, right, your software, your new version, right, at once, we will release slowly. So the older version will parallelly available to the users, majority of the users, and the newer version also available to the users. So that if any issues, right, if any issues in the newer version, we will roll back to the older version quickly, and very less number of users will be impacted with that bug. So that was the advantage of canary deployment. Okay, so with API Gateway, right, you can enable Canary deployments for any stage. That's a good feature. For each stage, you can enable Canary deployment, but it is most commonly used in the production stage. Why it is most commonly used in the production stage? Because these Canary deployments incur costs in API Gateway. So in dev or test environments, it doesn't make sense to use these canary deployments to increase your costs. But in production, definitely it's worth. So even though you can enable canary deployment in any stage of API gateway, you have to remember this thing. These will incur cost. Okay, so we'll see how it works, right? First, it will do is traffic distribution. So you can choose the percentage of traffic that Canary version receives. Here, if you observe, I said Canary only receives 10% of traffic. So this allows you to direct 10% of your traffic to newer version. Here, Canary means your newer version, while remaining 80% continues to use the stable version. Okay, so here you understand, right? In the API gateway, we said 10% should be go to the new version and remaining 80% go to the previous working version, so that only these 10% of users will be affected if any bug is there in the newer software, and we can roll back to the stable version if we see any bugs in the canary or newer version. And the second point is metrics and logs. So one of the coolest parts, the metrics and logs for the canary deployments are kept separate from main stage. So this separation is crucial because it lets you monitor the performance of the newer version without any noise from the existing one. So you will have your canary version of logs and you will have your stable version of logs. So both the logs will be separated so that you can easily track, because you have traffic distribution between the canary and stable, and if the logs got merged, right, it will be hard to find which logs error prone, or it's hard to monitor, right? But the advantage here is canary deployment providing you will have separate metrics and logs. And finally, you can override stage variables specifically for canary. So you have your stable version which is in a stage, and for the same stage you created the canary, and right, for canary you can override stage variables, and you don't need to use the same stage variables of the stable version. You can use the newer configuration also and test it in the production. Okay, so this means you can tweak the configuration settings specifically for the canary version without affecting the main deployment. Okay, and if you see this example, we have a client and this client is accessing a API from the API gateway. And here we enable the Canary deployment like this. So we said 80% of the users uses the version 1, which is the stable one, and the 5% or 10% users is going to use version 2, that is newer version. Okay, I hope you understand this concept, right? So that 80% of the major users don't get impacted by the newer version, and 10% will be tested in the production environment, and if we are good, we will replace everything with the version 2, 100% to version 2. So this is fascinating, right? And now, if you are familiar with blue or green deployments, this will sound familiar. The concept is quite similar. Deploying two versions of the same application, right? Blue and green, then gradually shifting the traffic from the older version to the newer one. So in this case, you are using AWS Lambda in conjunction with API Gateway to achieve smooth and low risk transition. Definitely, right? If you observe these points, Canary deployment equal to blue-green deployment. And what we are doing, we are gradually shifting the traffic between the old and new version, and we are minimizing the disruption during the updates to achieve smooth and low risk transition. Okay, and finally the benefits we have already covered, but I'm consolidating here. Why would you want to use Canary deployments? Simple, because it reduces the risk of introducing a bug or breaking change to entire user base, right? Early detection of issues. And if something goes wrong, only small percentage of the users are affected. That means it is isolated and impact on a smaller user segment. Only small percentage of users are affected. And finally, you can do a quick rollback if problems arise, right? You can roll back quickly before it impacts everyone. And right, by using Canary deployments in API Gateway gives you more control and confidence you need when you're pushing out new features or updates. So if you haven't tried it yet, I highly recommend giving it a go in your next deployment. So thanks for watching, and if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more AWS tips and tricks. See you in the next one. Hey everyone, welcome to Hands On Part. So previously we have seen Canary deployments and how those are beneficial for our pro- production deployments to minimize the risk of failures. Now we are going to see hands-on here. For that, I'm going to open API Gateway and I'm going to open Lambda also because I'm going to use Lambda as my backend. Okay, so in the API Gateway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an API, and I hope you have already aware how to create that. But before that, I will show you the Lambda function. So I have created a Lambda function earlier, that is my Canary test Lambda. And if I open this Lambda, right, what I did is I created a simple Lambda and I created two versions to that Lambda. That's it. Okay. So I hope you are already aware of how to create the Lambda and versions. So I'm not going to explain that here. And now in the API Gateway section, right, I am going to create an API. So REST API, click on build, and here I'm using new API and my API name should be my Canary demo. So this is my API name, but if you have some specific name, you can provide, no, for example, my test API something. Maybe Canary was confusing, so I just removed the name. So my test API and click on create API. So this will set up a API for you and give you the first resource, that is slash. Now, in order to make Canary deployment. So a deployment in an API gateway occurs in stages. I hope you are all aware of that. So what I am going to do now is I will create a new method under this slash resource. Every time we are doing the same. So we'll do one thing. We will create a new resource. We'll name it as test demo and click on create resource. Okay. In this resource, instead of slash, we'll use slash test demo, and in this resource, we'll try to create a method. So to create a method here itself in the resources, right, we will have this option called create method and click on create method. This will open this page where you will have method details. In the method type, provide your desired method type, HTTP method type, but I am going to select here is get. So once we selected get as our method type, we need to select the integration type, and you have a number of integration options here, and we will discuss about them in the future session. But as of now, I'm selecting the Lambda as my backend integration, and I am enabling proxy integration for structured event of my request. Okay, I hope you have already seen this in my previous sessions. So finally, I'm going to select the backend Lambda function. For that, right, you have to select the Lambda ARN here in this list. So here I have only one Lambda function, so I'm just selecting here, and at and once I go at the end, right, here what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a particular version instead of a particular Lambda. So for that, I'm going to mention :1. And in the previous session, if you observe, stage variables, we use some expression to get the stage variable. But here I am directly pointing to the :1. That means we're directly pointing to version, not to an alias. Okay. So I am trying to invoke the version 1 Lambda function. So we provided that, and finally go and click on create method. So once you click on this create method, right, slash test hyphen demo will have this get method, and which has this method request, integration request, and also the Lambda underlying Lambda services my Canary test Lambda :1. Okay, it is referring the version 1 of this Lambda, and we'll test this also. So if you scroll down for in the get resource itself, you will have an option called test. Click on test and scroll down below, and here, right, you will have a button called test, and click on test and see the result. So hello from Lambda version 1. So it is working as expected. Now we will deploy, right? So to deploy any API in API Gateway, what you have to do is you have to click on this button, deploy API, and internet is ask us to create a stage. So deployment occurs in stages. So here I need to create a stage. So in the choose option, right, I don't have any existing stages. I will create a new stage called, I will name it as Canary stage. Okay, since we are doing Canary test, so I'm saying Canary stage and deploy. So now we got created a stage called Canary, and it has this URL /canary, and inside Canary we have /test demo with get method, and this is the URL for that get method. So now just copy this URL and go back to your server, or sorry, browser, and paste it this URL. Now we'll see how it will respond. So it returns with version 1. So now we are good. Now we will try to enable Canary deployment. Okay, so the current users in the production using the version 1, and they are good with the version 1, which was very tested and also working fine in production. Now what happened is we have another version, that is version 2. So in the Lambda, right, I have version 2 also. So the version 2 is the latest version, and the testers and QA engineers already tested it, and they confirmed we are good with this version 2, for example. So if I test here, right, you can see we will get this response. Now I need to deploy or I need to route all the users to the test version, right? Instead of the current production version, because the new test version will become the latest production version. But instead of routing all the traffic from the users to the test version, it is better to use the Canary deployment. And why it is better, we have already discussed in the theory section. So to do so, right, you have to go to your resources. No, sorry. You have to go to your stages. In the stages, select your stage, and if you scroll down below, right, you will have this in the stage configurations. You will have stage variables. We have already covered, and deployment history, documentation history, and Canary. So this is where you can enable that Canary deployment. So if I click on this create Canary button, you will get this page. And here you will mention the Canary deployment. In the request distribution section, right? Here what it is saying is current stage is 100%. That means whatever the already deployed version, that is version 1, will get 100% of requests. And if I say some value here, for example 10, then 10% will be go to the Canary version. The Canary version is nothing but the newer version we are going to deploy. And current version is always the stable production version. Okay. So what will happen here? 90% of the requests go to the version 1 and 10% of the requests go to the Canary, that is version 2. That is newer version we are going to deploy. But for example scenario and you want to see the result quickly, I will increase this Canary to 50% for this example. But in real world scenario, we will only give Canary to 10% or 5% even for the lesser impact on the end users. Okay. For this example, I am using 50% for Canary and 50% for current stage. And here, as I said, right, you can override the stage variables for your Canary. Canary means the newer version of your code, right? Here you can add that. But yeah, by default, Canary inherits the stage variables from the stage. But in future, once you create a Canary, you can edit the stage variables. Okay, fine. You can override it. So I'm going to create the Canary now. And successfully Canary got created. And if I scroll down and go to the Canary section, you can able to see 50% will be redirected to Canary. And the stage name is Canary. But yeah, I named it as Canary, but you can name it as whatever stage you want, production or test, whatever it is. But yeah, now, right, we'll deploy the newer version and see how the request routing will happen. So to deploy a newer version, right, or to deploy the newer version of the Lambda, what you have to do is you have to go to the resources. So once we come back to our resource and the method what we're going to redeploy again, right? Here in the integration request where it uses the Lambda as a backend, here we need to edit. So here, right, in the integration request, we can edit the Lambda, right? We can point to the other version. So previously we are pointing to version 1. Now I'm going to point to version 2. But since we enabled the Canary deployment for the stage Canary, right? If you deploy this new change to the Canary stage, what will happen? It will use the newer version, that is Lambda version 2 as the Canary and Lambda 1 as its your stable version and route 50% of request to the 1 and 50% of request to the 2. Now we'll see. So I have provided the version 2 here and after that I'm going to save it. So the integration request has been edited and saved. And if you go here and see, we're using now second Lambda and we'll see test here, quick test whether we are getting version 2 or not. And if you click here test, you can see hello from Lambda version 2. We are good now. So now when we are deploying, right, if we choose the Canary and you can able to see, right, the stage name is Canary, but it may be production also, but here in the brackets it's showing Canary enabled. That means newer version always treated as a Canary and the older version, that is version 1, always treated as a stable version. Now if I select this particular stage, and you can able to see when you deploy an API to an existing stage, you immediately override the current stage configuration with new active deployment. So that is fine. So we are deploying this Canary enabled code. We are deploying this new Lambda version to the Canary enabled stage. We'll see now. So once the deployment completed, right, in the stage, in the Canary stage, you can able to see the setting is enabled. Now if I go to the browser, yeah, you can able to see, right, one request went to version 2 also, and again you are getting results from the version 2 only, and version 1 no, version 2 no, version 1, version 1, version 2 no. Look, so 50% of the results is routing to version 1 and 50% of results is routing to version 2. So like this you can enable your Canary deployment, okay, and route traffic. And here we used Canary to route 50% of the traffic. But in real world scenario, always remember you have to give very small amount to reduce the impact. Okay. And if you are good with the version 2, for example, you did a Canary deployment to set up this, and Canary test was good. All the users are receiving the good response from the version 2. So you can eliminate the version 1 and only use the version 2, right? So in that case, you will have an option called promote Canary. So if you click here, the promote Canary, what it will happen, right? Update stays with Canary's deployment. Update stays with Canary's variables. Set Canary percentage to 0. That means the newer version will be treated as a stable version. And if I click here, right, you will get only version 2 results. So if I go back, right, if I go back to the get and copy the URL, right, and go to the web browser and test now, you will get version 2 only. So how many times I hit, I will get version 2 only. I think it is taking some time to reflect. We'll wait for some time. Continuous refreshes of this tab, and now if you can see, right, only version 2 is appear. So sometimes to deploy that API gateway, right, underlying, it is taking some time. So we need to wait for some time. But if you see now how many times I'm hitting this URL, I'm getting only version 2 only. So version 1 got disappeared because we promoted the Canary. So version 2 has been taken the place of stable version. Okay, so like this you can enable Canary and also you can test it. Okay, so thanks for watching, and if you find this video helpful, don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more AWS tips and tricks. See you in the next video. Bye.